It's another episode of Hammercircuit. I'm Michael,
I'm Carter.
and let's get into it.
Okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about socialism and all the details that come with socialism, what we think about it, and we have a typed up list of some of the key points that we want to bring up. The first one is, why can socialism not work? And we have a few points under this. And the first one is, humans are competitive. Humans have a desire to be better than other people. So there's human traits, really, that are just negative, that can't coexist with socialism. In that sense, we are meant to be capitalist animals. We're supposed to be, we like being better than other people. We like working our way up through the system. We like climbing the ladder and becoming better than other people, and then starting our own possible companies. The list goes on.
Right, so we kind of have like a natural alignment to being capitalist because a lot of us have a desire to be better than other humans. You know, we always want the most shiniest thing, the most like efficient, better, fastest type of thing. Not only that, there's so that's more or less greed. What other negative human traits do you think we kind of have that kind of drive this more or less like capitalist alignment?
Really, greed is a big one that you mentioned. Others that I would say is just the basic desire to consume things, really.
Right. So
which is greed in that sense. But when I say like desire to consume things, in order to survive as humans, we have to consume things. But before in the past, before any like socialist policies were ever implemented, like I would say LBJ's Great Society programs, those are based on a socialist platform. The idea of welfare, Medicaid, Social Security, those are socialist ideas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Before those existed, if you expected to survive, to make money, to be capable of buying food, purchasing what you wanted, you would need to work. You would need to produce something in order to gain the money, in order to consume. So it's a relationship. It's the yin and the yang. It's Taoism in that sense. You have to produce in order to consume.
Right, but there are certain cases where it's not really equal, and what happens is it gives rise to the parasite class, or like the 1% of the 1%, like the upper class, like the class of people who they've produced enough income to the point where they don't really have to worry about it anymore, and they can just hinge and like consume from the results of the labor class or the working class.
Yeah, because oftentimes what we see is if you ever read a history textbook, which I'm assuming you have. I'm assuming most of the people listening to this are fairly educated. What you'll find is throughout history, there is an upper class that is taking advantage of the middle class. Or if not taking advantage of, they're at least annoying the middle class. You know, because people who are really rich, they're not necessarily directly impacting our lives, but it kind of bothers us when we see that we're working hard, we're waking up every morning bright and early, we have to shave, we have to go to work and work hard, and we still don't see too many results in the near sight, right? But then you see rich people and they get to live luxuriously, they're driving their Mercedes-Benz around, and it bothers us in that sense. In history, you see this happening from the French Revolution, where the laboring class, the middle class and the lower classes, they're upset at the upper classes for taking advantage of them, and this is what ultimately fuels a lot of revolutions, if not all revolutions throughout history. You know?
Right. You do have some people who they've worked their way up from the bottom, so they've kind of earned their way into a upper class environment. But like I still think that you shouldn't try to. I feel it's kind of ironic that you're taking away from the people that you used to be, in a sense, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's that consumerist mindset is like we like consuming things. We like kind of being lazy, sitting on the couch watching Netflix and stuff, and not really having to think about what went into making that entertainment and stuff. Because, you know, the people who made those actors and stuff, you know, they had the work to get to where they are, and they're constantly like acting to actually get paid, you know, and they're slowly making their way up as well.
Or maybe maybe like Netflix isn't the best
It's not
example,
the best
but
example.
I would say like an example would be like this. All right, if you go out and you buy a burger, like a cheeseburger at some fast food place, well, it doesn't seem like a complicated process because it's just a burger. You just purchased a burger and you're going to eat it now. But if you think of the process that went into making that burger, well, where'd you get the meat from? You got it from some sort of a slaughterhouse, some sort of a farm with a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
Somebody had to raise those animals, whether it be through cruel means or by organic means. I'm going to guess if it's from fast food, it's through cruel means, very cruel means. Then the bread. Where'd the bread come from? Someone had to farm the bread. Someone had to process the bread. You can go through item and item on the burger, and you will find that it had to be processed somewhere. And not only did it have to be processed from somewhere else, all of the tools that were used in those processing were also gathered through other places. An example: the wheat farmer who farmed the wheat in order to produce the bread, he had tools to farm that land.
And those tools were made by somebody else.
Exactly.
So you have all these people who are making a livable wage, right? Through their work, through what they create. And then you have the peoples on the higher up on the chain, the executives of McDonald's, for example, making an extremely large salary compared to the people who were actually just who are serving the consumers.
Right, and this is what infuriates a lot of people in the middle class, because we're all interconnected as a society. I would say the laboring class is all interconnected in the sense that they all have to work together somehow. They all have to produce something in order for it to be a coherent, one-body functioning system. For society to work, there has to be people working and producing things all over, from the farmers, from the people who produce the tools for the farmers, from the people who harvest the resources to produce the tools. It's all interconnected in that sense. And it takes production in order to gain consumption. In order to consume something, you have to produce something. And this is why we're often infuriated at the upper classes, because the upper classes have found a way to where they don't have to produce much in order to consume as much as they would like whenever they would like. And they take advantage of the people who are producing things in order to consume as much as they would like.
You could argue that, it still takes an effort, and there's a little bit of a skill or a talent to managing people and making sure all the means of production go well and smoothly. But, to a certain point, it's the same day after day and stuff like that, and the amount of actual physical work is completely different than the people on the lower end, than the executives.
Like, I'll give you an example of this. Remember when insulin was raised in price by over 100% to where people who are diabetic could not afford insulin? Well, it didn't take that much. It did take a little bit of effort to change the price, just with a few marks of a pen. That may have been a little bit of effort, but overall,
the effort required to now actually purchase the thing.
Yeah, the production that an individual would have to execute in order for somebody to have the money in order to consume that insulin that they need. In order to gain that consumption, they would have to work a lot harder than the executive would. Than the executive would just to do a few strokes of a pen to raise the price of insulin. And this is just one clear example of the upper class doing things to just rip off the lower classes in order to have, seek their own benefits and reap their own rewards and such. And this is what infuriates so many people.
So, this is a big driving point to why the socialism or certain aspects of socialism just can't work. Another one, which also kind of ties back to the parasite class, is that the people who've been raised in that environment where they didn't really have to work for what they have, socialism in itself it's a voluntary thing. It's the means of production, or the how do you best explain it with the production and the labor?
In order for there to be production, the means to production is labor, and the means to labor is consumption. So it's all a cycle. There has to be basic resources set in place for individuals if they are expected to labor. And what I mean by that is, if you want to get somebody effectively producing something, that requires labor. In order for somebody to labor, they need things like food, water, and shelter. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Right, yeah.
Those need to be met in order for somebody to be creative and produce something, right? So, and that would support the concept behind some form of a welfare state in order for somebody to have the resources to start producing something.
Right. So, but the main issue is that there's a certain amount of people who've gotten to the point or are in the point where they don't have a motivation. Their Maslow's pyramid of needs, right? That's already fulfilled even by them just not doing anything. So they don't have any motivation or incentive to actually work. And that's one of the key points that socialism hinges upon, to make sure that everybody's working for each other and everybody's doing stuff to the community's benefit.
Yeah. And also remember, so this could possibly be turned to be an argument for socialism, that there's people so rich out there that there needs to be some form of wealth distribution that is the middle land between, like, the middleman between communism and capitalism. People would argue that would be socialism, and that needs to take place in order to even this out a bit. But the reason why this concept would fail is simply because the people that are really, really rich are the people who are lobbying for their politicians or corporate politicians to get into office. And what I mean by that is, they will spend a lot of money on a politician for them to get into office, and then what happens is, it's kind of this, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. They scratch the politician's back, then they expect special benefits and special treatment to that company in return. And one example is, I don't want to be sued by Bob Murray while talking about this,
right,
even though I doubt he'll be listening to this. Bob Murray is a classic example. With Donald Trump, he's scratching Bob Murray's back, and a lot of people who supported coal mining voted for Donald Trump. So it's kind of, and that's just one example of it. It may not be the best example.
It's a fairly good example. Let's just hope that it wasn't the worst. However, what this really boils down to is that capitalism just doesn't benefit from socialism. This government lobbying thing, what the main goal of that is that people want their position of the wealth to be reinforced so they don't have to worry about it. That's why they would fund those politicians. The socialism aspect of things is that those rich people, they would never fund a politician who would be running to take away money from the rich people. That wouldn't make sense, right? So that's why capitalism wouldn't benefit from the socialism, because the people who have reaped the rewards of capitalism, they would lose money that they have earned through the labor of others sometimes, and they'll think, well, I mean, I've earned that money, like, why does it have to go to other people, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the main goal of that socialism aspect is just to make sure that wealth is distributed correctly and there isn't a huge disparity, because there are certain things that, certain things cost a lot just for the fact that people of high wealth can afford them. Another thing is that the Constitution of America is kind of wired against socialism. When the Constitution was established, it was established in the sense where only white landowners, people who own land, which you kind of had to be rich in certain aspects to even afford to own land in the first place. Would you like to continue?
That's very interesting to point out, because it says we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. Listen, blah, blah, blah. You get it.
Right.
it says we the people, but we the people really doesn't mean everybody. What it means is people who are, at least back in the day, what it meant was people who are white and owned land. White men who owned land. That's so. In order to own land, you have to have some wealth of some sort, right? Well, already you see the roots of America could be. There could be a case made that it was already set in oligarchy. An oligarchy is a society based on money. We do take our entire design, our entire economic model based off of what is it? Adam Smith. That's right. It was Adam Smith, right?
Something like that.
Yeah, it was Adam Smith. He was the inventor of capitalism.
Right. But what you're seeing,
so it's like that idea right there. The very model of capitalism was laid out, and eventually it's, I believe, in my opinion, it is transformed slowly over time into just a flat out oligarchy where rich people are pulling the strings. They're making the big shots and the big decisions in our lives.
But yeah, so what you're really seeing is you're seeing a really small slice of people, we the people, a very small slice of people actually, controlling the majority of, in order to form more perfect union, right? You're seeing a very small slice control the majority of the pie.
Right, and back in the day it was a bit different because a lot of people could own land, and a lot of people were dudes, and a lot of people were just white men. So it's like it was a bit different back then, but I think that's just the very roots that eventually grew into the oligarchy that we have today. And just to let you know, we're not saying an oligarchy based on no factual evidence. You can look up yourself, and there's been multiple studies done by credible universities that have directly... There's pretty much no argument at this point that there's some form of oligarchy.
Right, and if we are incorrect, feel free to comment below on the podcast or whatever, and we will definitely read through it, and we will try to correct it or put a info hazard in the description.
Right. The next thing that we'd like to go over is why socialism could work as like a true option for us. Would you like to start us off, Michael?
Sure. So obviously the main thing that we have to think about is that it's not going to be something as huge as America, because the bigger a society or societal framework becomes, the more room there is for something like societal decay that we've discussed in a previous episode. So what we would do, or what the government would do perhaps, is that this small society would form a potentially hybrid model. This would be in order to appeal to the capitalist societies, to make sure the government doesn't fall on its feet, because there's definitely certain nations need to get resources from others, because there's some stuff that they just can't produce themselves. So it would benefit both sides.
Right, but then there would still be a level of distributing wealth. That's the real beauty behind it, because with people allowed to purchase things, with the capitalist element of, materialistic items, people would still be allowed to purchase things that what they wanted at grocery stores. They'd still be allowed to purchase goods that they wanted on Amazon, or purchase things that they're selling on eBay, or selling something on eBay. People could still operate like that. But at the same time, what it's doing is it's taking a few nickels and pennies from people that are a bit richer, and it's passing it on to people that are a bit poor. And remember, we can argue there's some people out there that find themselves in need of welfare. Some are there by choice, others are there by circumstance. Those are there by circumstance, they want to work. Those there by choice, they need to be forced to work, which brings to the next point. Would you like to bring that up, Michael?
Right, so the parasite class, well, even like just a small sidetrack before that, you need to have a agreed how limited do you want the wage gap to be? Do you want it to be a difference of 10,000 or like 20,000? But even that, the parasite class, in order to compensate for the higher amount of money they already have compared to the average person in the society, they will actually have to work. if they don't, they will be taxed a lot more heavily to benefit the people who, do more work than the parasite class.
And then on top of that, they cannot expect any benefits that a socialist society would give. And this is where a lot of countries that are socialist are messing up. They promise these resources to anybody, and
regardless of their economic standing.
Yeah, if your economic standing is you're poor, you should obviously receive the resources as long as you're working. But the problem is that we cannot accept leeches just sucking resources out of the laboring class, and then they're not producing anything in return. Because this works for people who are in the low class, who are not making much money, but are consuming welfare just strictly to try to stay afloat and survive without producing anything. And it also applies to people who are a part of the parasite class, who are making a lot of money off of just the hardworking man in the laboring class. Those people on both sides cannot expect any resources being pushed their way if they are not willing to contribute to the laboring class. Otherwise, it's a double standard where the laboring class is being taxed and their wealth is then being redistributed to people who are not willing to join the laboring class.
So what you kind of see here is that you have a frequency distribution curve, and you kind of want to squeeze it. You want to have the extremes kind of go into the more average thing, so that the poor people can actually make their way into a more livable average wage, and the parasite class or the upper class, they actually have to work to compensate for the fact that they already have a lot of wealth to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the thing with a hybrid model, is you kind of want to guide both sides, the really poor side and the really rich side, more towards a average type of thing.
Yeah, because then it's the combination of people are allowed to indulge, and let's face it, humans love to indulge. There's nothing to be ashamed of, guys. That's what I argue. I would argue that is mostly what defines humans, the fact that we consciously enjoy indulgences. That's why we have alcohol. It's why we have drugs. It's why we enjoy sex. These are our biological wants.
To add on to that, I think a lot of the innovations that human civilization has created were, some of them were purely for the purpose of self-indulgence. Others were purely for the purpose of increasing the time we can just self-indulge,
Right, like an example of that with the light bulb. The light bulb is just a clear example. That was an invention that we made. It was an innovation into our society just so we could see better, see at nighttime, and increase our activity and increase our time that we could then spend to producing something so we could indulge, or spending that time just to indulge.
Another example of this would be the Industrial Revolution, where we we sped up the means of production by a huge amount. Obviously, the Industrial Revolution is a very big cause of the capitalist society we have today, but it gave a couple people the means to self-indulge. So what else? So what would happen is if we just wanted to improve a capitalist society in general? Well, there are some socialist additions or some things that we could do to make it where these capitalist extreme things that occur in our nation today, when they would just happen less. So if you want a more socialist thing, or just to add on to the hybrid model, in the sense, you want to have a small nation, and those things where you want to guide people to work, you only want to enforce it when it's really necessary. You kind of want to observe those rare things, the parasite upper class, and even the parasite lower class, right? Unless they're truly incapable of working, which does occur.
Right.
That does occur.
What Michael is stating here is that there should only be enforcement, because let's face it, if the government's getting involved in anything, there has to be a gun involved in it. And the gun isn't literally it's not literally a gun. It's just referring to force. Whenever the government is involved into something, there has to be some layer of enforcement. That way that you can because if there is no layer of enforcement, then that means that people can do whatever they want, and the government is literally just like a barking poodle, with a collar on. It's like the classic: the dog is chained to a post, and the dog is just like running, and then it's just clotheslined by its own.
Yeah, definitely.
That's basically what happens with the government when it doesn't have any force, but there's a law in place. The government has to have some level of force, and we'd like to avoid that if necessary. And going back to what Michael said about a small nation, if you look at Scandinavian countries that are socialist, they're very small and they have fairly small populations, and that's why they're functioning so well, which makes sense. And if we were to do that in America, I would recommend trying to break down this, implement this to the state governments. Of course, there still needs to be a federal government, but I would like the state governments to increase in power to some extent. That way, the state because our states are almost the size of Europe, or the size of European countries. So the states
would kind of gain a little bit more power to the point where they're kind of comparable to those other small European countries.
Exactly. And I think that'd be a brilliant idea, because if each state has the independence of an individual country, but they're all tied together, in that sense, it almost becomes the European Union.
Yeah, though you could face the issue with looking back in history, the Civil War. Mm-hmm. American Civil War. You got the South, and the North. They both had totally different ideas of where to go with some things. The South were kind of the means of production, and the North were the ones who were the factories. Not even touching on the fact of slavery itself. I mean, that was also a driving factor. So I mean, there is a con of that. If you have it where you give the state more power, I mean, they might be more willing to get into conflicts with other bordering states on a couple things.
That's true. But then again, we have to remember, this is in a sense an experiment. A lot of the socialist stuff, it can't be. It has to be an experiment to some sense. We should experiment with some of these ideas to see if we can benefit our humanity and try to push it forward. And I think the best way, if we were trying to push a self-sustaining system, it would have to be small, like you said before.
Yeah, and I mean, it would be like a voluntary nation in a sense. And if you, I don't know if it would work the best in America. America's kind of, there's a lot of things that need correction besides just trying to incorporate socialist aspects. When you form this societal experiment of a thing, the first generation, they'll probably get along well. Maybe the second, third generation, they'll be a little bit more adversarial to the primary generation, or the original one. The thing is that if it's voluntary, you're free to leave. You just only have to keep in mind that most of your family's there, and most of the time throughout history, we usually listen to our parents. It's a kind of biological thing where we have a family love type of thing. Right. It's different than love with a complete stranger. That's a different type of love. That's something for a different podcast. But you just make sure that people know that you don't have to live in that nation. It's a small nation. It's there mostly for a societal experiment, kind of similar to the temples or monasteries in Asian countries. Right. They're more or less self-sustaining.
Right, and some of the since they are self-sustaining, they can feel free to experiment, varying upon the different states, because if the different states do have the power to experiment with some of these socialist ideas, some of them would be such as universal paid maternity leave, which I personally would advocate for, because it just doesn't make sense to why would you force a woman to try to stay and work as long as possible while she is pregnant? That's not healthy for her, the baby, or the family. It's just not healthy. And remember, the family is often what influences the culture. This is a quote from Stefan Molyneux. If you expect to change society, you first have to look at the family. And if you were to do otherwise, that would be like trying to move a shadow without pushing the object.
I think another thing I've heard is that the family is the smallest unit of society that you can look at, which kind of adds on to the quote that you were talking about. So that's one example, is like universal paid maternity leave. We already kind of see that in a lot of European countries, and some companies inside of America actually do utilize it. Not all of them, but like the thing is that when you have a woman and they're carrying a child, depending on the work, and I mean, if it's manual labor, they're gonna have terrible time trying to actually contribute, and like certain things, they're just gonna kind of drag down the rest of the people who are working to produce something, whether it be like business or something. Basically, point being is they're not gonna be able to produce to the most that they could. So paid maternity leave would be to the benefit of a lot of people,
and that might require some money to be generated through taxes. Now remember, a lot of our taxes are currently mismanaged. That's a podcast in and of itself right there.
Yeah.
In all honesty, but this is just one story. We spent $30 million. America spent $30 million on Afghan uniforms that were the wrong color of camouflage. That's just one example of our tax money being mismanaged. So I think if we could get our taxes in places like where our tax money's going, we could easily afford to implement programs such as universal paid maternity leave. But if not, there still does need to be some sacrifices. We have to accept that we have to make a few sacrifices here and there from our luxuries in order to benefit the greater good. I would not mind making a few small sacrifices here and there. I would not mind coughing up an extra nickel or two if it meant that mothers could spend time raising their kid, could spend time with their baby instead of being forced to go into work and slave away like a dog. I'd rather cough up a nickel or two of extra of my money to help women have paid maternity leave.
I mean, it depends on the amount of money you're making. A nickel or two, we're just using that as an example,
right?
But
well, that's not a literal amount,
right? But yeah, there has to be a sacrifice of some luxuries, and in a sense that certain luxuries are just a result of large societies and like a huge culture and stuff. For example, fast food chains, right? That's kind of the result of like streamlined manufacturing, processing, that type of stuff at its highest, basically. Another thing, like similar to universal paid maternity leave, I would have to say, actually, I can't really think of an example, but
an example of socialist ideas.
Well, oh, I know one. Well, you have to kind of farm for some of your food. If you do own land, don't just have land, farm on it, or have some. And keep in mind, we're like looking at this like 2017, right? Next 10 years, we have. I mean, there's some ideas, but technology can take us to new heights in many fields like agriculture, nursing, all those things. So it might even make it easier to do more with less material. So
I completely agree to that.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of this stuff we just have to wait and see. But I think it would be a really cool societal experiment, right, Carter?
Absolutely, I 100% endorse this.
So this was another episode of Hammercircuit. I'm Michael.
I'm Carter.
And we hope you have a great day.